It's this part, Aragorn the Dúnedain. Aragorn was born March 1st, 2931 of the Third Age, and he died 210 years later on his birthday, March 1st, year 120 of the Fourth Age. So he died when he was 210 years of age, and during the time frame of the events of The Lord of the Rings, he's between the ages of 87 and 88. Aragorn's lifespan being greater than that of normal men has to do with him being a Dúnedain. What does that mean? Well, Dúnedain is a Sindarin word. Sindarin is one of the Elvish languages within Tolkien's writings. And the word itself can be broken down into two parts. Dún, which means west, and Adain, which means men, specifically referring to three households of noble men that fought with the elves against the dark forces of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord of Middle-earth. These houses being Beor, Haleth, and Hador. When considering the Dún portion of the word, meaning west, that's actually referring to the Dúnedain being men of Númenor. And the reason why that's connected to being men of the west is because Númenor was an island situated to the west of Middle-earth. These Dúnedain, specifically during the time of Aragorn, were descendants of Númenorian men, and Númenorian men came from the west. So there you have the Dúnedain, meaning men from the west. Speaking to the long lifespan of Aragorn and the Dúnedain, this was actually a gift given to the men of Númenor by the Valar. I know that I've explained this in other videos, but I think it's important to have this understanding. Eru-Ilúvatar is the god of the Tolkien universe. And Eru-Ilúvatar, before he created the world which Middle-earth sits in, that world being Arda, he created these powerful spiritual beings called the Ainur. And the Ainur were divided into two different groups, the more powerful Valar and the less powerful Maiar. And the Ainur actually assisted within the creation of the world of Arda. And after Arda was created, some of those Ainur came to live on Arda. And they lived on what potentially could be considered a continent, that continent being Aman, and within a place in Aman called Valinor, which could kind of be considered like a country of Aman. One of these Valar turned wicked and sought power and dominion, that Valar being Melkor, and Melkor became Morgoth. And eventually Morgoth went to Middle-earth to seek power and dominion. During his time in Middle-earth and in his attempts to continue to spread his power and dominion, he waged war upon the inhabitants. Going back to that word Dúnedain, specifically how it's broken up into Edain, and how Edain basically means men, and specifically can refer to the three noble houses of men that we discussed earlier. Well, those three noble houses were faithful to the elves and fought with them against the dark forces of Morgoth. One of the individuals that actually belonged to one of these noble houses, the House of Hador, was Eärendil, the very same Eärendil that's connected to the light that is given to Frodo by Galadriel. Eärendil and his wife Elwing are tremendous heroes considering everything that they did and sacrificed for Middle-earth. And one of the most important things that they did is that they journeyed to the land of Valinor. The reason why this is important is because mortals were not allowed to step foot on Valinor, and Eärendil was a mortal. However, he did this to beg for the assistance of the Valar in combating against the dark forces of Morgoth. Thankfully, the Valar gave heed to Eärendil's plea for help, and they assisted in defeating Morgoth in what's known as the War of Wrath. Speaking to that same Eärendil and his wife Elwing, they had two sons, those sons being Elrond, who we know from Lord of the Rings fame, if we've watched the movies or read the books, and their other son was Elros, and they were actually twins. Because of the sacrifice that Eärendil and Elwing made in venturing to Valinor, they were given the gift of being able to choose whether or not they wanted to belong to the kindred of men or to the kindred of elves. And the reason why they were afforded this opportunity is because their ancestors were both man and elf. That gift of choice was also given to Elrond and Elros. Elrond chose to be amongst the kindreds of elves, and Elros chose to be among the kindred of men. The reason why this is important is because going back to those faithful men who fought with the elves against the dark forces of Morgoth, they were given the gift of a new place to live by the Valar, and that new place to live was the island of Númenor. And they were given that gift because they fought against Morgoth with the elves. And the first king of Númenor is Elrond's twin brother, Elros. And not only were they given the gift of a new home to live, they were also given the gift of a longer lifespan than ordinary men. In fact, the first kings of Numenor lived for 400 years or greater. The island of Numenor was actually created in the year 32 of the Second Age. Well, fast forward a couple of thousand years later, and unfortunately many of these men started to develop this jealousy over the immortality of elves, and also began to be fixated and focus and have this obsession on death. Not only that, they started to believe that the Valar were purposely withholding the ability to live forever from them. And over time, there were these two divisions that grew out of this. You had the Kingsmen, the ones that were jealous of the elves' immortality and believed that the Valar were withholding immortality from them. And the faithful were the ones that were faithful to the elves and to the Valar. And then fast forward about 3,000 years later, there was a king, Ar-Pharazôn, that captured Sauron and brought him to Numenor. And there Sauron from within Numenor began to sow even more seeds of discontent against the elves and the Valar, and even initiated the practice of worshiping Melkor or Morgoth there within Numenor. And during this time, these kingsmen actually built an armada of ships in order to invade Valinor, where the Valar lived. This resulted in the destruction of Numenor. But thankfully, some of those faithful who were faithful to the elves and to the Valar were able to escape. Two of the faithful that escaped you may have heard of, Elendil and Isildur. Once the faithful escaped and made it to Middle-earth, eventually these men of the West established two kingdoms, the Northern Kingdom and the Southern Kingdom. The Northern Kingdom was Arnor, and the Southern Kingdom was Gondor. The Northern Kingdom was eventually destroyed by the Witch King of Angmar, that same Witch King that stabbed Frodo there on Weathertop, or Aman-Sul. After the Northern Kingdom was destroyed, the remnants of the Dúnedain became rangers, and their objective was to protect the lands of the north. And eventually we have one of these Dúnedain rangers that becomes very important to the story of Middle-earth, that Dúnedain ranger being Aragorn. And Aragorn is actually a descendant of the first Númenórean king, Elros. There's more than 60 generations between Aragorn and Elros. And so the reason why Aragorn has long life is because his ancestors were blessed with longer lifespans as a result of his ancestors fighting with the elves and being faithful to the elves against the dark forces of the first Dark Lord, Morgoth. Over time, the lifespan did shorten of the Dúnedain. However, their lives were still longer than other men, with Aragorn living to the age of 210. Now, when thinking about that and how I might be able to apply that to my life or perhaps yours too, one thing that I think that is important is that our decisions matter and are vitally important to those that come after us. Perhaps it's our children, our grandchildren. If you don't have any children, it could just be those that will come after you, and that will be affected or impacted because of the decisions you made. If we make good decisions in this life and try to do things to help create a better world, this in turn can be a great blessing and help to those that come after us. Sometimes this takes sacrificing and making hard decisions. I would anticipate that choosing to fight along with the elves against the Dark Lord Morgoth would have been incredibly frightening and would have had to have been a sacrifice. However, making that decision blessed their posterity afterwards for many, many generations. I believe that can be true with the decisions and choices that we make today. We can literally help make the world a better place for those who will come after us. Second, I think it's important to think about the things that we have in our lives and to express gratitude and to cultivate the spirit of gratitude for the many things that are good in our lives. The reason why I say that is because it's my perspective that the Kingsmen lost sight of the things that were given to them that were good by the Valar, and they lost sight of the benefits of the positive association that they had with the elves. Instead, they started focusing too much on the negative and started festering in jealousy and in greed. And in turn, that only leads to something that results into misery, at least from my perspective. However, if they had tried to cultivate a spirit of gratitude, they would have never gotten to that place. They would have realized that even though they may not have immortality like the elves, that what they were given was significantly more than what other men had. Other men didn't have the ability to live as long as they did, and yet they complained about the good things that they did have. And so those are just two things that I think that are important to consider, is that number one, making sacrifices and making decisions now can truly help to make the world a better place for those who will come after us later. And then number two, it's so vitally important to cultivate a spirit of gratitude within our lives so we don't get lost and forget about the good things that happen. And also, when we're so focused on the negative, we can sometimes get wrapped up and led into making decisions that are destructive to us, just like what happened to the Kingsmen in that account of the men of Numenor. And so I love this part, Aragorn the Dúnedain.